Afghanistan boost. President Trump may be considering sending more U.S. troops to help fight the Taliban. A call for help.
My health condition is deteriorating quickly.
A priest kidnapped 14 months ago appears in a new video asking for his release. Preparing for Fatima. We'll show you what's being done at the Vatican and in Portugal to get ready for the Pope's big trip. And building the Bible Museum. We're inside as crews work to build Washington, D.C.'s newest attraction coming this fall. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 9th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump is considering sending thousands of more troops to Afghanistan. Military leaders are expected to propose 3,000 to 5,000 additional U.S. troops to accelerate training missions for Afghan forces. Sources say the Pentagon is also discussing plans to scale up strikes against the Taliban. Meanwhile, the Trump administration will be providing heavier weapons to Syrian Kurds fighting against ISIS. The administration will provide mortars, machine guns, and ammunition to the Kurds. The decision could hurt U.S.-Turkish relations because Turkey says the Kurds work with a terror group operating in their country. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer says the mission is to clear ISIS from Syria and Iraq.
His priorities remain the same, but he's going to do what he can to make sure that he protects the country and our people and threats that directly affect the United States.
Spicer says he's not sure if President Trump has spoken to the Turkish president yet, but the U.S. remains committed to protecting the NATO ally. The president's pick for Secretary of the Air Force is confirmed by the Senate. Heather Wilson is the first Armed Services Secretary to be confirmed in the Trump administration. 3 other Defense Department candidates had been forced to withdraw from consideration. Wilson is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, a Rhodes Scholar, and a former member of Congress representing New Mexico. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is on a tour of America's newest national monuments and is looking into whether the federal government was right to preserve sacred tribal lands.
I'm actually optimistic. At the end of the day, we'll make a recommendation that I think will be best for our country and best for preservation.
The trip to Bears Ears National Monument in Utah comes after the president ordered Zinke to determine if 27 monuments were properly established. Bears Ears was established by former President Obama near the end of his term after a coalition of tribes spent years urging the area to be made a national monument. Senate Democrats asked Republicans to drop their bid to repeal Obamacare. In a letter to the GOP, all 46 Senate Democrats and 2 independents say the legislation faces an uncertain path to the president's desk. Last week, the House passed the replacement bill. The GOP can only lose 2 Senate votes to pass a legislation with the vice president's help. The White House is defending its handling of fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Sean Spicer saying today, "We did what we were supposed to do." This comes after a congressional hearing where former acting Attorney General Sally Yates testified that President Obama warned Donald Trump not to hire Flynn. Joining us now via Skype is Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Hans, Democrats are playing up the fact that it took 18 days for the White House learning that Flynn was not telling the truth about his meetings with Russian officials and Trump's decision to fire Flynn. Did the White House handle Flynn correctly?
Well, you have to remember they're just coming into office. They are overwhelmed with huge issues and trying to fill literally hundreds, if not thousands, of slots in the federal government. The fact that it took them a little while to take care of this, I think much ado is being made of nothing. And let's not forget this. Flynn isn't accused of doing anything nefarious. In fact, he was doing exactly what you would expect incoming head of the National Security Division to do, which is to speak to foreign ambassadors to get what their feel is about their relationships with the American government, and then to be able to advise the president on things that perhaps ought to be changed. So he wasn't doing anything nefarious, which is what everybody seems to be hinting at in all of these hearings.
Sean Spicer still fields a lot of questions about it. What do you think it's going to take for the White House to be able to put this issue behind them?
I think this is really, in essence, a media-generated controversy. Flynn is gone. He wasn't in office very long at all. So I really don't see why they are making such a fuss about this.
Let's switch topics here then, Hans. Yesterday, President Trump named nearly a dozen nominees to fill federal court vacancies. A lot of attention has been focused on his Supreme Court pick, Neil Gorsuch, but these nominees are going to have a huge influence on legal issues. What can we expect?
Well, he picked what looked like conservative judges who believe in applying the law and the Constitution. This is very important. Why? Well, because there are 120 vacancies in the federal courts. This is just a start on filling those vacancies with good judges. And we know this is important because we have had, frankly, erroneous decisions coming out of liberal activist federal judges all over the country. We need to get some better judges into the lower courts.
The president's new executive order on immigration is being challenged in courts this week. Could these new judges have any impact on the future of this issue?
Well, the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals heard arguments this week on his revised executive order. None of these picks were for the Fourth Circuit, so it won't affect that court. But having gotten Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court is going to be most important to his revised alien entry order. Why? Well, because when the Fourth Circuit rules, if they rule against the government, then we're going to get an appeal directly to the Supreme Court.
And he has a lot of other court positions to fill as well. Hans von Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thanks for having me.
A judge throws out the murder conviction of a former NFL player, Aaron Hernandez. The court heard arguments from the district attorney who successfully prosecuted Hernandez in the 2013 shooting death of Odin Lloyd. The judge vacated the conviction because his appeal was never heard before the former Patriot star was found dead in his prison cell last month. His lawyer says the investigation into his death continues. The Iraqi military, with help from coalition forces, is gaining ground in the battle against ISIS in Mosul, but hundreds of thousands of civilians are caught inside the city and facing desperate circumstances. 3-month-old Miriam was carried out by her uncle. Miserable is how he describes life in the city, under siege now for months. God save us from that rotten gang, Abu Hussein says, referring to ISIS. With little food or medicine left, hundreds of thousands remain trapped in the city. Iraqi forces have established what they call safe passages for fleeing civilians. Safe, however, may not be the best way to describe them. On the hill above, soldiers fire rockets over the civilians' heads into the city. And this is what has become of Mosul. An ISIS car bomb goes up in flames at the edge of Mosul's Musharraf neighborhood. Iraqi forces launched the latest operation last Thursday morning from the north and northwest. In a nearby operations room, Iraqi officers and American advisors direct a drone over the city. Unlike in the past, the Americans on the ground, like Lieutenant Colonel Jim Browning, can now direct airstrikes without waiting for approval from senior officers in the rear.
All it requires is me to be able to see it with my partner. And once we are able to kind of communicate and say, yes, that is emphatically an enemy and we are under threat, let's deliver a strike and let's deliver it quick.
And as always, civilians are caught in the middle, struggling to survive, struggling to escape. ISIS is expected to favor insurgent-style attacks as it loses more territory. Iraqi leaders are hoping to regain full control of all of Mosul by the end of the month when Ramadan begins. South Koreans elect the country's first liberal leader in decades. Moon Jae-in claimed victory in today's presidential election. Moon is a former human rights lawyer who favors closer ties with North Korea. He replaced ousted President Park Geun-hye as she awaits trial in a corruption scandal. An Indian priest kidnapped 14 months ago by ISIS militants in Yemen appears in a new video pleading for help.
Please do what you can to help to get me released. May God bless you for that.
The newly posted YouTube video has not been authenticated, but appears to show a thin-looking Father Tom Usanali. The Salesian priest says he is in poor health and needs to see a doctor. He says he's thankful for everyone's concern. Father Tom was kidnapped during an attack on missionaries of Charity House that left 4 sisters dead. You can see more about Father Tom's plea, including the full video, at CatholicNewsAgency.com. A court in Indonesia sentences the Christian governor of Jakarta, Indonesia, to 2 years in prison for blaspheming the Quran. Many in the crowd outside the courthouse celebrated as news of the verdict was announced. The outgoing leader, popularly called Ahok, was accused by Islamic hardliners of insulting their religion after he quoted a verse from the Quran in a campaign speech. He says he will appeal the decision. Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim nation. The Vatican is preparing for the Holy Father's trip to Fatima this weekend. The visit took months to plan, and as EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin tells us, the small town is ready for big crowds.
1 million people are expected to attend events for the 100th anniversary of the apparitions in Fatima, Portugal this weekend. 2 of the visionaries that saw the Virgin Mary in 1917 will be declared saints by Pope Francis on Saturday. Their official portraits were released just this week and will be displayed on the basilica here. The rector of the shrine says the new saints inspire and challenge us.
Not only 2 saints of the Church, but 2 saints who challenge us to look to the message of Fatima and to understand that Fatima is also a school of holiness for each one of us.
Last-minute preparations are taking place to get ready for the Pope's arrival on Friday. Security will be tight around the Marian shrine that welcomes 5 to 6 million pilgrims each year. They come to hear the message of Fatima, a message that the bishop of this diocese says is just as powerful today as it was 100 years ago.
The sense of God is lost, and when one loses the sense of God, they also lose the sense of humanity. Because of this, the message is always relevant.
This will be Pope Francis's first visit to Fatima. The very first pope to visit here was Pope Paul VI in 1967 for the 50th anniversary of the apparitions. In Rome, Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, heading to the polls. It's election day for voters in Nebraska, and those on the left and the right are keeping an eye on one pro-life Democrat. Plus, a closer look at the link between eugenics and the nation's largest abortion provider. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Voters in Omaha, Nebraska head to the polls to vote for mayor, and on the ballot, a pro-life Democrat. We've been following the race involving Heath Mello. He's a 37-year-old practicing Catholic who supports a pro-life position. Top Democrats had planned to stop in Omaha at the rally for Mello, but abortion rights groups were outraged. Senator Bernie Sanders endorsed Mello at a rally last month. We'll keep you updated with the results. Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger is known for her advocating in favor of eugenics as a form of population control. Lauren Ashburn sat down with one expert for a closer look at the link between eugenics and Planned Parenthood.
Joining us now is Angela Franks, author of Margaret Sanger's Eugenics Legacy, the Control of Female Fertility. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Describe eugenics to us.
Eugenics is the belief system that a person's worth is measured by whether or not they're eugenically fit or unfit. And so eugenicists believe that there was a whole group of people whom they labeled the unfit, whose value was really less than people whom they thought were genetically superior.
So, for example, World War II, when the Nazis used eugenics, they were trying to create a superior race, wiping out thousands of Jews, right?
Exactly.
So Margaret Sanger then used the eugenics movement to establish Planned Parenthood, which is, I think, what your book is about here. And how did she do that? How did she mold the narrative of eugenics to make it appealing to the entire population?
Yeah. So in the 19-teens and 20s and 30s, eugenics was a very popular idea among people who were educated and elite. And so Sanger took this idea that some people were fit and some people weren't, and she connected it to population control with the slogan, quality, not quantity. And so her idea was that really this was going to save, the human race, that we were going to breed people who are of a higher quote unquote quality instead of just having lots of people.
So Planned Parenthood uses eugenics in what way?
It's very clear in the early documents of Planned Parenthood that they were committed to eugenics. Now, after World War II, eugenics really lost a lot of popular support because people saw how murderous it could become. So after World War II, eugenics goes underground, and it really becomes much more closely fused into population control. So I say population control is eugenics with a passport.
So I interviewed Archbishop Charles Chaput, and in his new book, he says this about eugenics: the quest through genetics and technology for a new kind of humanity that transcends the jail cell of the purely human brain and flesh is a new research frontier. Why has it become so commonplace now? Is it because of the research?
Yeah, that's really caused a resurgence of eugenics as the genetic research became more and more specialized and more accurate. I mean, really, eugenics in the 1920s was wildly inaccurate. But today we know a lot more about the human genome. And so the idea is now we're going to manipulate it and control it and produce superior people.
And very quickly, we just have a few seconds. What is going to happen with the eugenics movement moving forward?
Well, I think what's going to happen is that people have to resist it. And that's, the technology is going to be there.
All right. Angela Franks, author and director of theology at St. John's Seminary. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Vatican is celebrating the Big Bang Theory this week, inviting leading cosmologists to talk about black holes and space. The Vatican Observatory is hosting the conference, which looks to bridge the gap between faith and science. It's being held in honor of a late Jesuit cosmologist who is considered one of the fathers of the idea the universe began with the Big Bang. The head of the Anglican Church visits the birthplace of Jesus. Archbishop Justin Welby stopped at the Nativity Church in Bethlehem as part of his Middle East tour this week. He took time to pray in the church and shook hands with tourists. Welby was also expected to meet with the President of Israel. Up next, a different take on the Beatitudes, how one father is helping other men understand God's love. And focusing on the Bible. We'll have a look inside as crews prepare a brand new museum in the nation's capital.
Lo spirito che mi porta la parola con docilità.
Receive the Holy Spirit with docility. That was the Holy Father's message during Mass this morning. In his homily, Pope Francis reflected on early Christians' openness to the Holy Spirit. He said if we open our hearts the same way, we'll display goodness, joy, peace, and self-control. The Pope added, all this describes a Christian attitude. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A Catholic father of 3 writes a new book using the Beatitudes as a practical guide to understanding how God's love can help men be better fathers. Earlier, I sat down with the author. Joining us now is Dr. Greg Popchak, author of the Beatitudes, 8 Ways to be an Awesome Dad. Greg, what does it take to be an awesome dad? Let's start with the obvious.
Well, the first thing I think it takes is that humility. The first beatitude that I take all of these beatitudes, by the way, or beatitudes from Jesus's beatitudes on the Sermon on the Mount. And the first thing it takes is the humility to recognize that being a dad is all on the job training. None of us really know what we're doing, right? Mm. So we have to be willing to go to God the Father and ask him, what kind of a father does he want us to be? To go to our wife and kids and ask them, what do you need from us? And by being willing to ask those questions, we're able to learn how to be the father our family needs.
How can the Beatitudes specifically, those values, help men become better fathers?
Well, like I said, but first of all, by cultivating a listening heart, right? Pope Francis said that the Beatitudes are a blueprint for Christian living. And as I prayed through those reflections, it occurred to me that the Beatitudes really reveal to us not just what we need to do, but it also gives us an idea of how God the Father relates to us, his children. He exercised that poverty of spirit by emptying himself and giving himself to us. He exercises that mourning whenever he has that compassionate heart for our struggles. And so by modeling ourselves after the way God the Father relates to us, we can be living out that fullness of Christian masculinity and fatherhood.
You yourself have 3 children. How did your own personal experience as a father contribute to this book?
Well, what I've always looked at parenthood and marriage as a spiritual exercise first and foremost. And I really recognize that God gives us the kids we need. And by responding to the unique needs that God has written on each child's heart, we grow in ways that we'd never think of growing if it was up to us. And so, I've been challenged in beautiful ways to grow in all kinds of ways by responding to my kids. And I'm really grateful for their influence on me and for the opportunity to hopefully lead them closer to the Lord and help them become the people God created them to be as well.
It's a tough society that we live in. Families have so many demands, and parents are often stressed with work issues and shuttling the kids to activities, household tasks, everything else. How can dads help families find the right balance and some peace in the family?
Well, I think the number one thing is recognizing that families aren't accessories, but rather activity. Family life is an activity, right? So instead of just sort of seeing family as something that I have, I realize it's something that I have to work at, that I have to make time for. So we talk in the book about the importance of creating rituals of connection around 4 areas of family life: work, play, talk, and prayer. And making sure that we're having at least a little time, even 2 or 3 minutes a day, to work together on something, to play together in some way, to pray together as a family, and finally to play together as well and have some laughs. Making family life an activity and creating those rituals of connection really allows us to prioritize family life as opposed to letting it fit in as the last thing I have to do after all the other jobs are accomplished.
A whole host of really important lessons there. Greg Popcak, author of The Bedatitudes, 8 Ways to Be an Awesome Dad. Thanks so much for talking with us about it.
A pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Our nation's capital is packed with museums highlighting everything from art to science to history. But this fall, the focus will be on the Word of God. Mark Irons joins us in studio to tell us about the latest addition to DC's cultural scene. Mark?
Wyatt, the president of Hobby Lobby, Steve Green, is the man behind this project of biblical proportions. $500 million is transforming an old DC warehouse into a museum dedicated completely to the Bible. I toured the property that is slowly bringing the scriptures to life. It's an active construction site in the center of our nation's capital.
That you see to the right there?
But blueprints will soon be replaced by the Dead Sea Scrolls, and divinely inspired exhibits will fill these empty hallways. The doors open to the Museum of the Bible in November.
Whatever your faith tradition, faith, no faith, the Bible has in some way affected your life, whether you know it or not. And we feel like just even to be an educated person, you should know about this book.
Less than a mile from the Capitol, the 430,000 square foot museum will have 8 floors. Once finished, you'll find rare biblical text and artifacts inside, and interactive exhibits dedicated to the history and impact of the Bible.
This is a replica of a first-century synagogue, and right now it's actually being used as a storage room for equipment.
A recent tour shows the progress being made as Nazareth, the home of Jesus, is recreated.
It's a fun task, I'll put it that way. It's got its challenges, yeah, and we want to get it right, so trying to be as authentic as we can.
And some displays have already been moved in, bringing to life the scenes of the gospel. Remember the biblical story when Jesus said, "It's better to have a millstone tied around your neck and be tossed into the sea than to cause one of these little ones to sin"? Well, this is a millstone. The sights will be accompanied with sounds like Amazing Grace, a Broadway musical that will play out in the museum's theater. First edition Catholic and Protestant Bibles and the world's largest private collection of Torah scrolls will all have a home under one roof.
I see in this place all of those faith traditions that dispute and debate over different interpretations of the Bible coming together to celebrate this book that we all love.
The president of the Museum of the Bible says they have a very strong working relationship with the Vatican Museum. Some of the Bible Museum's displays have already been showcased in the Vatican. Wyatt?
Mark, there was so much to see there. What do you think stands out the most, or what stood out the most to you when you walked around there?
Location, 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 right in the center of D.C., a great spot to be. It's going to be a place where visitors can learn about the scriptures in a variety of ways, from the exhibits to the actual artifacts and text. It should have something for everybody.
When we talk about those artifacts, that millstone is a great example of, I didn't even know what a millstone really
You don't
looked
want that
like.
around your neck.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Mark. And we thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Good night, and God bless.